So I was on the clay.earth website the other day when I came across this thing. Fancy, yes. Spinny, also yes. And gets the point across really well for what they're trying to get across here. But deceptively tricky in a couple of unexpected ways to actually put together. Don't get me wrong, it's not rocket science, but anytime that I need to break out the old middle school math textbook to make my CSS animation, I consider that a good learning experience. Let's break down how it works. So before we actually jump into writing any code here, I just want to come over to my Figma really quick and give a basic rundown on how I'm thinking about doing this. There's kind of a couple of different steps that we can break down on how this works. So first we're going to need this central circle that has this kind of glassy background. We're going to figure out how to do that. Then we're probably going to need to figure out how to place items at kind of equidistant points around the circumference of that circle. After that, we're probably going to have to figure out how to rotate them in a circle. And then maybe after that, we're going to have to figure out how to keep each of these individual spokes on the wheel oriented in the same direction as they rotate around the circle and, get bigger and smaller and stuff like that. So in my Figma, we can imagine that this guy right here is just like the container div for the whole thing. I'm gonna grab a circle and I'm just gonna drop it in there in the middle. Maybe make that straight white, give it some transparency, throw some background blur on there, and bam, we should have a glassy effect now in Figma. Super fun. For the glassy effect in CSS, that's going to be really easy. I don't want to harp on that too much. The one thing we have to think about for this circle is just that it's going to need to sit in front of our other 6 circles. So we're going to have some kind of position relative or something so we can sit a Z index on that to make sure it's sitting in front of these background circles. But the fun part's going to be figuring out how to place the 6 circles around the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a circle on in here, and we can start kind of thinking about this. So we could just kind of start fudging around with some numbers, maybe, absolutely position this in the box and try to just mess around and, place them by eye. And that's probably would be okay for something like this, seeing as they're getting bigger and smaller, and it probably doesn't need to be exact to look good enough. But if we want, we can use a little bit of math to do this exact. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't remember any of the math that I learned in school. Fortunately, though, we have this fun thing called Google, and with a little bit of Googling and a little bit of reading and clicking around, you can remember that the way that you can find points, where'd it go? The way that you can find points from the center of a circle is using cosine and sine. We'll get into that a little bit more further on in the video. But point just being, back over in our Figma, we're going to take our circles and we're first going to set them absolutely positioned to the top left. That's where they're going to kind of go by default. And then we're going to translate them so that they're in the middle of this circle. And then we're just going to use a little bit of math to place each of them on the perimeter of our circle, equally distant from each other. Each of those 6 circles, so obviously this isn't going to be right, but I'll just drop a couple of circles in here. So we'll have our 6 circles. Each of them will have started in the center, and then we'll put them all around the perimeter using some fun math. And to actually rotate them, we'll just have all of these in one containing div. And then we're going to rotate that outside div. And while we rotate that, we're going to rotate each of these individually in the opposite direction at the exact same speed so that they stay oriented in the right direction. Simple enough. Let's get to it. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I have a little bit of this already boilerplated out. I just removed all the fun stuff and just have kind of a basic little starting point here. So taking a look first in my index.html, all that I have is an index.html file and a styles.css file. Here in our index.html, I just have the body, and then I have a div with an ID of wheel that's going to be the wrapper around everything. So this is going to be kind of like setting stuff in the center of the screen, probably have position relative on it so that we can do stuff with these spoke things here. That I haven't written yet, so obviously you're not going to see what those look like yet. And then this div with an ID of hub. So what we're starting off with is an unstyled version of, fun, got to reload. Sweet, this thing right here. So the first thing we're going to do is just make our little centerpiece here, and then we'll figure out the other stuff. Over in our styles, I have a little bit of stuff in here. So I just grabbed a font from Google Fonts. This is Akshar, if you want to follow the same as what I'm following, AKSHAR. In my star selector here, just removing padding, margin, box sizing, border box, and giving everything that font family. For our body, just giving it a black background. And then for this wheel, which is like that outer wrapper, just giving it a position relative, giving it a height of the size of the screen. You can set specific heights if you want, whatever. Overflow hidden, display grid, and place items center. So now we can come down to our hub styles here, and we're just going to start off by trying to style up that center wheel thing. First things first, we'll just go ahead and grab our hub. So it has the ID of hub on this guy right here. Once we've grabbed that, we just want to set some kind of width and height for it. I'm going to use just a specific width and height for this. I want this to stay the same size at all times. And whatever size you're using for this will determine a little bit of what we're doing later on for actually placing stuff around the outside of the circle. For mine, I'm going to choose 350 pixels, both width and height. We'll give it a border radius of 100. I think you actually only need to do 50%, but whatever, 100%. Just we want to make this a circle, so give it a really big border radius. Under that, we are going to set a background color. So for my background color, this is essentially just white with a very low transparency on it. Essentially what we're doing here is we're gonna start, here, let's just start with that and go ahead and save. So we have a circle like this. What this lets us do is this transparency, because we have transparency on this, we can use this backdrop filter blur property. And essentially what this is gonna do, if I save this, it's not gonna look any different right now. But anytime something now goes behind this, so whenever we have those other circles that are kind of rotating around the outside, how they have this kind of little blurry part right there, this is going to kind of give us that effect. So anytime something now goes behind our main hub circle here, we're going to get that blurry effect for whatever goes behind it. The bigger this number right here is, the more blurry it's going to be. So I chose 12 pixels for this. It takes a little bit of messing with. If you want it more blurry, bigger number, less blurry, smaller number, up to you. After this, we can go ahead and start styling the text. So I'm just going to set a color of white, and you'll see that I do have clay right here. So I just am, copying the text that's in this. They're using some other font. Actually, it looks like they're using an image. Interesting. But just having it say clay right here, set the color to white. We can see that it's up here, and we want it to be down here. So that is an easy enough problem to solve. First, we'll give this a bigger font size because it looks a little ridiculous right now. There we go. And then we'll set this in the center of our box here, just using display grid and place item center. Now, the last thing that we have to do is just make sure this whole thing has some kind of z-index on it. So first you have to set a position to be able to set a z-index. So position relative, z-index of 1. And the reason that we want to do this is in later steps, we're going to be taking those circles and we're going to need those to sit behind this. So they get that little blurry effect right there. And we'll just set a z-index of 0 essentially on those so that they sit behind our enter kind of hub here, which now has a z-index of 1. And next thing's next, that's not a thing that people say. So next up, we're gonna go ahead and start adding our wheels around the outside. So I'm calling them spokes for this, but we're gonna start adding our little circle-y boys on the outside here. Jump back over to this. The first thing that I want is inside of our wheel. So this is right under our hub here. I'm gonna add another div in place of my little comment here. So div. And this div is going to have an ID of, let's see what I call it last time, spoke wrapper. So this is going to be the wrapper around all of our spokes here. See, that made some stuff move. We'll fix that in a second. For our spoke wrapper here, we just want to place everything in the middle here. So I'm going to come down. Let's see, we can leave some comments here so this is more easily readable. So under my hub, I will give a comment with spoke styles here, and we'll go ahead and just grab our spoke. Oops, that's not what I want. Spoke wrapper. Sweet. I'm gonna give this just some random background color so we can see what's happening. Let's give this blue, maybe, which you're not gonna see yet. And now all I wanna do is set this position absolute to the screen and make it kind of the size of whatever the containing div is. So all I have to do to that is say position absolute. Then you can give an inset property of 0. This is essentially like saying top, left, bottom, right, all of 0. So it's kind of a shorthand for that. Then again, just display grid and place items center. So the display grid place item center will come into use here in a minute. So what we're seeing is happening here is this taking up the whole size of the screen. It's not technically taking up the size of the screen. It's taking up the size of this wheel class because this wheel is the wrapper and that has a position relative on it. So if this was, say, 70 viewport height, it would be 70 viewport height. That's why it's important that we put position relative on this so that anytime that we change the size of this wheel wrapper on the outside, we still get the same effects. Go ahead and change that back, and we can now remove this disgusting background blue. As I had mentioned earlier, whenever we're going over the Figma stuff, right here, we're gonna be wanting to spin this later, so I'm just gonna leave ourselves a to-do, say, add spin animation, and we will come back to that in just a little bit. But the idea here is that we're going to have all of our spokes on the outside inside of this wrapper, and then we're just going to spin this whole wrapper, and that's going to give us this movement here. So this movement, kind of clockwise movement of all of the spokes. Then we'll have another animation on the individual ones, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so we'll come back to it. Next, back over here in our HTML, I'm going to come inside of our spoke wrapper, and I'm going to start adding spokes. So we'll just start with one. We're just going to use divs again. I'm going to give it a class of spoke. And we're gonna have 6 of these. I'm gonna want each of them to be able to spout, I want to be able to style each of them individually. So I'm just gonna give them each IDs. So ID equal to spoke 1 for this first one, and then we'll have, 6 of those or whatever. But let's just start with 1. We'll take it slow. So I have my first spoke here. So now I'll go ahead and just grab our spoke selector here. I'm gonna first things first, just give this some background color. We're gonna remove this in a little bit, but just so we can see what's actually going on here. Under that, we just wanna set some width and height. Essentially, we just wanna make a circle here. So I found 210 pixels looks pretty good. If you want a bigger circle rather, make it bigger, smaller, up to you. 210 pixels looks good to me. And then border radius just to make this a circle. Under that, we want all of our spokes to be absolutely positioned in the middle of the screen. So we can go ahead and save that. We'll see what's going on. If you just have one circle, I can remove this. You'll see that it's in the same spot, and that's because of our grid and place item center on our wrapper up here. But we want all of these to be on top of each other, essentially. So we want these all to start stacked on top of each other. So this way, if I have a couple of other ones here, they'll all be on top of each other. Undo that. And that way that we can essentially, from 0 point right in the middle of this circle here, we can place these on our, 60-degree increments around the circle. Under that, the last thing I'm going to do is just give this a display of grid and a place items in the center. That's because we're going to have these SVGs in the middle, and we're going to want those to be in the middle of our circles. And while we're talking about that, I'll go ahead and just style that as well. So spoke, SVG, give that some size. Don't have it yet, but gonna do it now so I don't forget later. And now we have one circle. So now what we wanna start thinking about is actually how we're going to place this around our circle. So I'm gonna go ahead and start by just grabbing our first spoke. So spoke 1 is the ID that I gave to our spoke here. And we can start thinking about how we might actually want to place this on our screen. So you could, like I was saying earlier, just kind of try placing this somewhere. So we're already using top left and translate here. We could, instead of doing it like this, maybe comment that out, try and do this automatically. So do something like top 100 pixels or something. And then maybe, okay, more than that, maybe 150 pixels or no, not even close, 250 pixels and then, left some size and then try and do that with all 6 of these. And then it's just going to look, you might be able to make it look close enough, but it's going to be pretty tough. And you're not really using a scientific method there, big guy. So we're going to actually use a little bit of math to make sure we're placing these in the right spots. Go ahead and remove this, place this back in here and back at our blank slate. So the way that we do this, I'm going to grab this comment that I have over here and paste this over here, is using a little bit of math. And along with that math, a little bit of margins. So I'm going to start by just stubbing this out. We'll say margin left of 225. Oh, I know that's the answer. Wait. So we'll start with 0 pixels and a margin top of 0 pixels, something like that. So this isn't actually going to move this thing yet. What we can do is we can use a little bit of math to actually get our X and Y coordinates for any angle that we want. So if we think about 360 degrees, so circle 360 degrees, we're going to have 6 spokes, so 6 circles around here. So we're going to want one of our circles at every 60-degree increment, because 360 divided by 6 is 6, right? 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36. Hopefully, we don't do public math, but we're doing public math right now. We're doing public math right now. And the way that we can do this is just by plugging that into this little algorithm that I have here, this little equation that we have here. So to figure out X would be our margin left, essentially. We can just use our radius times cosine of whatever that angle is. So 0 degrees, maybe for our first one here, and then 60 degrees, and then 120 degrees, and so on and so on. The radius for this example that I found looked good was 225. If you make this bigger or smaller, it's essentially just gonna be how far this blue circle in the middle is away from the middle. It's their radius, right? 225 looked pretty good for this. So you can just use the old Google and get your answers for these different values. We'll start with 0 degrees. So 225 times sine 0 degrees, which that's gonna be our Y, is 0 pixels. And then we can do the same thing for cosine 0 degrees. And that'll give you 225 pixels. So for our margin left, we'll do 225 pixels. Come back over to our example here, and we'll see that that is now placed this at 0 degrees from the center of our circle here. We can do a second one really quick just to show how this works. So say spoke 2, and then style that one as well. So spoke 2. In spoke 2, we're going to want to be at 60 degrees. So that's the first kind of increment. So we'll say 60 degrees. 112 and a half, we'll just say 112, and cosine is our X, so that's going to be margin left of 112 pixels. For margin top, we just switch this over to sine 194. So we're going to want to do 194 pixels for our margin top, and I missed a P. Save. And that has placed our second circle around the outside here. I'm not going to sit here and do all this math. I'm just going to go ahead and drop 6 circles in here. So we'll just copy paste this a few times, say 3, 4, 5, 6. And I will do this math myself and show you guys in a second, but I'm not going to make you see me poke it all into a calculator over and over again. And there we go, magic of editing. So now I have all of these in here, spoke 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all with their values. If you don't want to do this math yourself, you can go ahead and just copy mine. I'll scroll slowly here for you. But we now should have our 6 circles around the outside of our inner circle. And you should see that we have this little blurry part here on the bottom, right? Got a little blurry guy. The next thing that I want to do really quick is probably just grab the actual correct colors for these, just so that they look nice. All that I would do to do that is I would just come in on here. You can style these however you want, but I'm just going to yank them all from the original, because I want to make this look just like the original. Just grab it, grab each of our linear gradients here, and drop those in. I will also do that off camera and let you guys just copy it so you don't have to watch me copy pasting 6 things over and over again. And now I copied those. You're also going to want to remove the background blue guy from your spoke because these have transparency. But there we go. Now we have 6 circles, different colors. They have these nice little smooth gradients on them, except for this one. Apparently this one's special. And this is going to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. We can also drop in the icons. I'm also just going to yank these icons. I know I'm just skipping past a whole bunch of stuff right now, but gonna grab these icons from their examples, make sure I drop in the right ones. You can just go in here, find the SVG, click copy and copy element, and then just kind of paste it in your HTML inside of these spokes. So something like that. You'll have to make sure you're matching them up with the right colors, but that should be straightforward enough. I've already done this, so I'm just gonna take the ones that I've got here, instead of copy pasting it all again, and paste these in here. And make sure that looks right. Yes, so now we have all of them with their icons just stolen directly from clay.earth. Super dope. Now for the fun stuff. So now it's time to start figuring out how we spin these things. I'm gonna go ahead and close up these divs that I have here so that we can actually start thinking about this. Essentially what we're gonna do, going back to kind of what I was explaining with that Figma, is we're just gonna spin this spoke wrapper in one direction, and then each of these individual spokes, we'll spin in the opposite direction at the same time. We can jump over to our CSS to start actually defining this. I'm just going to define all of these down at the bottom. I'll just close up all of these. And then we can define our animations down here. We're going to have a few of them, so we'll just keep them all in one spot. The first one that we're going to do, let's just start writing it. So we'll say keyframes, and we're going to call this spin wheel. We're going to have 2 different spin animations, so got to just have them distinct from each other somehow. And to start, we'll just say from 0%, we'll be at transform, rotate 0. And we won't add all the little stops in here. So we'll just say from 0 to 100%, I want this to be at rotate 360 degrees. And we can go ahead and just drop this up here where I left that comment. So let's scroll up a little bit on our spoke wrapper here, remove our comment, and we'll just say animation. We want to do spin wheel. We want this to be, 10, 15, whatever seconds. 14 seconds is what they used in the original. Add some easing curve. So ease in out is how you're going to get the exact same kind of spinning animation that they have in theirs, or the same easing rather. And we want this to go forever. So we're going to say infinite. If I save that, we should now get a consistent spin. But now you see the kind of issue that I was talking about, right? All of our icons, everything's upside down as it goes around. In order to counteract that, we also want the stops in this, but we'll come back to that. But in order to counteract that, we'll make a second animation here. We'll call that at keyframes. We'll call it spin spokes. And spokes is essentially going to be the exact opposite of this. So it's going to be 0% to minus 360 degrees. We can copy this other one that we had up here. Where did it go? Spoke wrapper. Yep. So grab this animation here. And for now, we'll just come to our spoke right here. And we will paste that here. But instead, we want spin spokes or spoke. Was it spokes or spoke? Spokes. Yes. Sweet. Beautiful. So now we see it's rotating smoothly and all of our guys are spinning in the opposite direction, right? Now the next thing that we need is for this to actually have stops. So we want essentially 6 stops around the outside of this. We don't want it to be just one smooth animation like this. And the way that we do that is very straightforward. So I'm going to start with our spin wheel animation. And essentially what we want to do is, if you didn't already know, you can add as many different percentage values in here as you want. So we can say, hey, from 0 to 5%, we want this to stay at transform rotate 0. And then between, say, 5% and what did I use last time? 16.67% is what I used last time, because math. We want it to rotate to 60 degrees. And then you can keep doing these steps. Essentially, how do you get these values, right? You just do 100 divided by 6 to get each of your kind of stops. And that's going to give you each of these stops for being able to turn it 1/6 of the circle, right? So if you had 8 spokes, you'd just do 100 divided by 8. And then your first stop would be at 12.5. Then your next one would be at whatever, 25 degrees or 25%, et cetera, et cetera. We want this to stop for some period of time between each one. So that's why we're doing this extra little thing here. But you could imagine that you would just do something like that. Actually, that probably wouldn't make sense. You do want it to stop for some period of time. But anyways, 0% to 5%. So this is going to be our first 1/6 of a turn. We'll have that pause there for a little bit. And I'm obviously just going to start pasting these in instead of writing all of this in slowly, but feel free to copy it as we go. We'll then spin it another 1/6 of a turn to 120 degrees, another 1/6 of a turn to 180 degrees the next time. One more. Or not one more, there's a couple more, but the next one, another 1/6 of a turn, 240 degrees. And then the last one before 100%, one more 1/6 of the turn, 300 degrees, and we can go ahead and click save. So now we should see that this is stopping every 1/6 of a turn. We can kind of tell that it's exactly 1/6 of a turn. Obviously, it's going to look ridiculous right now. But because we're aligned up essentially horizontally, like you see, we're perfectly lined up still with the kind of original grid, if that makes sense. Now what we need to do is just with the spin spokes, we need to do the exact same thing. But fortunately, we can just go ahead and copy what we already have here and do the same thing we did earlier, where we just switched it to negative values. So you can paste this into your spin spokes and then just give this negative degrees for all of these. So now if you've done that, you've added negatives to all of these and you refresh, you should see that we have this spinning perfectly 360 degrees both this way and kind of spinning back in the other way, keeping the orientation as it should be. Next, we want to actually start thinking about this, or last, I guess, we want to start thinking about this scaling animation. So we can see when they're up kind of at the top, they're small, and then they kind of in a, linearly get bigger in either direction before when they're down in this kind of bottom right area, they're at their biggest point, essentially. We can define this in a very similar way to these other keyframes. So I'm gonna go ahead and just copy one that we have here because we're gonna wanna have the same animation stops as these ones, and we'll call this scalar. Instead of transform, rotate, all those type of things, we can just do scale. And maybe we want to start at 1. We can just kind of go through this and then make them smaller and make them bigger like this. So maybe then it steps down to 0.9, et cetera, and essentially just change our different sizes here. I'm going to go ahead and again, grab the ones that I already have and just walk you guys through those instead of writing all these because that's super boring. Let's see to the top and paste what I already have here. Okay, so for my example, I started at 1.15, then went down to 0.85, down to 0.75, down to 0.675, and then started stepping back up. So back up to 0.75, back up to 0.85, and then back up to the full 1.15 scale. Now what we can do is, I'll go ahead and grab this name, close down this keyframes, come back up to our other animation that we have for all of our spokes. So this is gonna be the kind of first interim step that we have here. We'll go ahead and grab this at the end. We'll just add a comma, and we're gonna want to use our scalar animation, and we'll just copy all this same stuff here. Click save. And now we'll see we have a little bit of a problem, right? So we want these to be stepped, right? We wanna have one of them be really big, and then the next one smaller, 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 bigger, 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 etc. So what we're gonna wanna be able to do is add this animation individually to each of these with some kind of delay. And fortunately, there's a really easy way to do that. If you just pop in right here, you can actually define how much delay that you want. So maybe you wanted -2 seconds. And obviously this is gonna add -2 seconds of delay to each of these, but we wanna do this individually. So let's try and see if we can figure this out. We'll go ahead and grab this, and we'll come down to our first spoke. So I think our first spoke's the LinkedIn one. Paste this down here and see what that does for us. So we'll see we have a little bit of a problem because we're overriding the initial animation. So we have this animation on all of our spokes for spin spokes. That's up here. And whenever we add the second animation, it's overwriting our first one. So what we're gonna wanna do for this is just do, I'll backspace a little bit or Command Z a little bit, back to when we had both of these animations, is we're just gonna want to do individual animations for each of our spoke IDs. So I'll go ahead and just grab this from all spokes, remove that. We should see it's not doing that counterclockwise spin anymore. And then just start coming through and adding our animations to each of our spokes one at a time. We can actually calculate these delays as opposed to just trying to like hard code them by doing something like this. So we can use CSS calc and just start with something like this. So hey, this is our first animation, and 2.33 seconds is going to be 1/6 of 14 seconds, which is our full animation, right? And we can just go through and drop all of these, say copy, come down to our next spoke, and this is going to be our second one. So this one is going to be delayed slightly. So it's going to be ×1, down to our third one, paste, ×2, oops, ×2, ×3, to our fifth one, ×4, and 5. Then we can go ahead and refresh. And we should see that this is working now. The only thing is we're a little bit off on our placement from the original, right? So the biggest one is the first one now, and the smallest one is directly to the left, so this guy over here. And on their original, the bottom right one is going to be the biggest one. And because of how we wrote this, it's super easy. So if you wanted to shift this in one direction or the other, you can just change these multipliers. So for our example, we actually want the fifth one, at least how I've written this, to be this first spoke here. So we could do ×5 for this, and then ×0 for this, and then ×1 for this, and just go through all of these and change them kind of linearly like this. You can do this in any direction if you wanted this to start with the biggest one at, some other part. Nice, so then it should end with 4. So we'll go ahead and save that and look back at our example here. We should now get, refresh in case it's a little bit off. We should now get our biggest guy down here at the bottom right as opposed to directly to the right. And that is pretty much going to cover it. I hope you guys learned something. I had a lot of fun building this. If you did learn something, I would absolutely appreciate a like and a subscribe. As always, I will see you next time. Peace.